All right, everybody, you with your main man, Anthony Brogdon, coming at you again, and I got a smooth guy on the channel today. Ooh, man, he gonna blow your mind with some good Black history. He got a good black backdrop. You see his plaques on the wall. He got all these awards and dissertation stuff that he has done, and he's a professor. And he spends his time, his career, I'm sure it's some of a hobby, researching, talking about, sharing Black history facts with people to enlighten folk, to educate people about Black history. And you know, a lot of times, and we say this, Black history is not just Black, it's American history. It's all intertwined, because it happened in America, those that we talk about, those stories. I'm Anthony Brogdon, and I'm so excited, my man is on the channel that I forgot to tell you who I am. I couldn't believe it. Man, let me tell you, I don't know how I found this guy. I reached out to him, he said, yeah, man, I come on. And he's on time. That everybody else, you know, on time too, but oh man, I'm super excited that I got an expert on the channel. So everybody, hit the subscribe button on Strong Inspiration. It's free, it don't ask no information. Hit the like button on this video. Watch, I'm telling you, he's gonna tell you something that you're gonna like and you did not know. So just like it, that's free. Hit the notifications bell and tell somebody about Strong Inspirations. Don't keep it to yourself. I believe, and this is just my prediction and just me saying this, if you tell somebody, you get blessed, because you sharing something that can help their lives and understanding the beauty of us, African-American people, and of other nationalities who helped us along the way. All right. Now, let me ask you this. Did you see the video I got on the channel where the lady said her great-grandfather, he went to college, and this is in the early 1900s. He went to college, got his degree, couldn't find a job. He opened up a fruit stand in his town. I think it's Georgia, I'm not exactly sure. And he was doing so well, he's, you know, so enterprising. The white guy came up to him one day, said, I want your spot. And he smacked this dude. The dude smacked him back. But you know what happened then? My man had to scam that night. He leaves that night. He goes to another state, and again, it might be Georgia, Alabama, I'm not sure. He leaves in them, he goes home, tell his family, we got to get out of here. I just did something. We got to leave, and it's not gonna be good. So he leaves, he goes to another place, and he ends up, because he had a college degree, he teaches at the university, whatever. His father dies. He has to go back home. And you know, they never heard from him again. Watch that video. They can't tell you what happened. He wasn't unhappy at home. He just had 2 small kids and a beautiful wife. So it ain't that he left. They believe he ran into the wrong crowd, and they never heard from him again. The lady tells us, watch that video. I got the other video on the channel where the lady says, where the guy says they had his grandfather at the tree, and they let him go. Watch that video. Did you see the one that I got where the granddaughters of a guy who was enslaved, the great-granddaughters of a guy who was enslaved? My man knew how to work that iron. You know, he was one of them iron workers, what have you. When he get his freedom, he started a car manufacturing company in 1905. Watch that video. Oh man, the train has left the station on Strong Inspirations. And I'm so confident now, I got my own Black History Festival. That's right. I call it I call it Freedom Quindaro, because we're going to Kansas City, Kansas, Memorial Day weekend. My man, he waiting. Come on, man, I got to tell him that y'all got to come to my festival. I want 1,000. I can't take no more than 1,000. And it's very reasonable. I'm gonna feed you. I got events. I got African drummers, dancers. I got a guy playing the spoons, banjo, and everything for the weekend. Check me out. Go to my website, businessintheblack.net. Many of you might know I've done this documentary that is very good. My sales are up. People are watching it on Amazon. It's on the rise of Black business in America. It's called Business in the Black. Please do that. You will not fall asleep watching my movie and read my book. I'm this thorough. I follow through on mine, my friends. I got big plans, and the book is one of them. It took me maybe about 8 months to put over 200 facts, and I don't put no commentary. I'm not trying to dilute it. I let the fact stand on its own merit. I number the fact, and then I give you the reference where I found the fact in the back of the book. You order a copy of my book, I'll autograph it. And I got a feeling that's gonna mean something one day before I'm finished with you all, my friends. That's gonna mean something. And so go to businessintheblack.net. That's my website. I'm sure some of you who've been watching me know that my favorite word is the word strong. I like the word strong. And strong stands for strength, tenacity, resilience, and a sense of oneness, nobility, and grace. And that is my introduction to my guest today. He's a strong man coming out of a little town where he the big fish there. I know it. Everybody tell me about him. Come on, introduce yourself. Thank you for being on Strong Inspirations.
Oh, it's my pleasure. I'm Robert Weems. My current position at Wichita State is the Willard W. Garvey Distinguished Professor of Business History. My research has been in the area of African-American business history, just some other biographical stuff. You know, before I came to Wichita State, I spent the bulk of my academic career at University of Missouri, Columbia. And I was born and raised in Chicago, Illinois. And it was there that I got a lot of early glimpses of what Black people could do in the realm of business. And just another factoid is that, you know, my dad is from Kansas City, Kansas. You know, the Weems family, you know, is a, you know, pretty well-known name in Kansas City, Kansas. So for me, you know, not going to Kansas City, but being in Wichita in Kansas, sort of like a mini homecoming for me.
I love it.
In one regard.
Let me do this though, and you've alluded to it just a tad. Let me ask you a couple of questions. Do you know how your folks got to Chicago?
Well, similar to most of our people that ended up in Chicago, and it's kind of an interesting story that sort of ties in with, you know, railroad lines in the early 20th century, because in history, there's something called the Great Migration, where we saw the beginning of African-American movement from the South to the North. And a lot of that movement took place in straight lines based upon pre-existing railroad lines. For instance, the old Illinois Central Railroad that ran from New Orleans to Minneapolis, that was the line that took, you know, people from Mississippi, Tennessee, Arkansas, up to places like, you know, Chicago, Milwaukee, and what have you.
Okay.
On the East Coast, you had, you know, the old Pennsylvania Railroad that took people from, you know, South Carolina, North Carolina, up to Philly, you know, New York and Boston. So people tended to go in straight lines based upon, you know, the railroad system at the time.
Let me ask you that. Do you know of where the plantation was in your family?
I know that the Weems family came from Mississippi, because Weems is kind of a unique name, because a lot of times growing up, when I would say my last name, people would say, well, Williams? I said, no, Weems.
Yeah.
But again, that's a great question.
What made you want to, and I know you alluded to Chicago and the beautiful, thriving Black business district, but how did you choose that as a career topic? Black history and business Black history.
That, you know, again, great question. You know, growing up, one of the books that was around the house when I was a kid was, you know, Carter G. Woodson's classic, The Negro in Our History. So that was one of the things that I read. You know, being a child of the late 60s, you know, coming of age during that period, you know, and just seeing and being a part of certain of the Black activities of that period, African-American history was something that I sort of naturally gravitated toward, and then
Yeah.
just went on to, graduate school to enhance my knowledge. Our business history, and quite frankly, that was one of the best decisions, personal as well as professional, that I've made in my life, because if there's any area that remains understudied, and you know this yourself from your own
Yes.
research and writing, it's our historic business activities.
Yeah, it is kind of strange, and in my book, I go back to slaves owning businesses, which I never heard of that story.
Yeah, again, one of the persons, I've been blessed to meet in my life on a personal professional level, and you may be familiar with the name of Dr. Juliet Walker.
Yes,
who,
right.
Yeah, in fact, she had, before she retired, she had established a institute, for the study of Black business and entrepreneurship at the University of Texas, Austin. She wrote what I would consider to be the classic book in terms of African-American business history. And her sort of narrative, she takes us back to, business activities in Africa, business activities among enslaved people. Another sort of pioneer in that realm that, again, someone I know as a friend and as a professional acquaintance, John Sibley Butler, who is also at University of Texas, Austin, wrote another important book on the history of Black entrepreneurship. So yeah, there's just a wealth of, literally mind-blowing information when we look at, some of the things that we've done in the realm of business, and arguably I can't think of a more inhospitable environment to be an entrepreneur.
That's right.
Than to be an enslaved person trying to engage and run the business for yourself.
Well, so in your studies, what area do you mainly cover in terms of business history?
Yeah,
Is
my
slavery,
primary
after
focus,
slavery, or what?
Yeah, my primary focus has been, 20th century. I've written a lot on, African-American owned insurance companies.
Okay.
I've wrote a book on, African-American consumerism. I've also written a book on sort of the relationship between Black entrepreneurs and the federal government, governmental entities in the 20th century. And one of my sub themes in my research has been the impact of racial, desegregation.
Yeah,
on Black
definitely. Yeah, I like that. And so when you analyze that, what little known fact do you have from that perspective?
Well, one thing that's very clear when you look at the historical record and using Black insurance companies as a reference point, because I really sort of cut my teeth on Black insurance companies. I did my PhD dissertation on a Black insurance company in Chicago that I revised later into my first book. And in my subsequent publications, I've always found a way to weave in something about Black insurance companies. And I think looking at their history gives us a nice microcosm of really the limitations from an economic standpoint, or the negative dynamics from an economic standpoint of racial desegregation. Because I would argue that integration from an economic standpoint never really happened, because integration denotes a sort of two-way movement. And what we saw beginning in the mid and accelerated in the late 20th century was white-owned businesses getting increased access to the African-American consumer market. But conversely, Black-owned companies were unable to expand into the larger market and get non-Black clients.
That's right.
And among other things, that has contributed to pretty much the near extinction of Black-owned insurance companies today. Because as recent as the 1960s, there were more than 50 viable Black-owned insurance companies in the United States. Today, that number's down to 2. Yeah, North Carolina Mutual and Atlanta Life is still based in Atlanta, is still viable, because in fact, Atlanta Life, ended up buying the company that I did my dissertation on, Chicago Met, which went out of business in '96.
Okay.
And the evidence suggested by the end of, the 2020s, Black-owned insurance companies may be gone totally.
Oh my God. Now, one of the first Black insurance companies that I cite in my book is the African Insurance Company. Are you familiar with that? And they go back to slavery days.
Yeah, if I remember correctly, that was found, I believe, in 1811. I think I saw a date around 1811 for that particular company. Yeah.
And then from that, what else? Do you know some of the earliest Black-owned insurance agencies?
Well, my focus again has been, because for instance, we talk about insurance. One of the ways in which our people were initially introduced to them in a big way was through various fraternal organizations that really sprang into being after the Civil War. And in fact, one of the more fascinating ones was one called the True Reformers.
Yeah.
That was established by an individual named William Washington Brown in the 1880s. And the interesting thing about the True Reformers was that they were a temperance organization. They were against the drinking of alcohol. And their rationale was that, the money that Black people spend on alcohol, we could use this money, in fact, to invest in businesses. And indeed, in the late 19th century, we saw the True Reformers, pretty much establish a nice business conglomerate. But unfortunately, and what happens all too often, is that when the founder of a company or a movement dies, shortly thereafter, we see the movement dissipate.
And you got a good point there. It is those fraternal and Masonic organizations that are based on, or they have an insurance component.
Exactly.
And now, prior to them coming on, white insurance agencies would not have us as clients, so we had no insurance.
Well, and again, I'm glad you raised that point, and this is something that I found in my research, is that, early on, and especially we look at, from the 1860s into the 1870s, our first decade as quote unquote free people.
Right.
When you look at, sort of, what an insurance conglomerate is today, but was then relatively, still growing startups, like Metropolitan Life and Prudential. Right. Early on, they insured the ex-enslaved Black population, and they insured our people at the same rates that they insured their white clients. Oh. But as we know, with the rise of Jim Crow, racial segregation, and other sectors of American society, we saw something very similar happen in the insurance industry. When we get to the 1880s, we saw both Prudential and Metropolitan Life that established, separate and unequal policies toward Black consumers, where they charge Black people more for insurance coverage than they charge their white counterparts, whereas earlier it had been equal.
Oh, really?
And when we get to the 1890s, we saw Prudential just pretty much, and other white insurance companies, just stop insuring Black people altogether.
Oh, really?
MetLife continued to insure Black, but again, charging Black people, higher premiums. And it was in this setting that, again, we saw the births of North Carolina Mutual and other legal reserve, African-American owned insurance companies.
When we talk about insurance as an industry in itself, and let's say within the Black community, can we say that is one of our greatest moments of networking among ourselves and the synergy among ourselves? Because let's say I might say the insurance is, I give you a nickel, and it's a bunch of us to give a nickel. You use the money you invested, and then when I die, you pay me some premium. I gotta trust you as a person to follow through on your thing. So I gotta trust a Black guy to figure out a way to help me, and all these other Black people. We come together. So that might be our greatest networking moment, something like that.
Yeah, and indeed, the fact that these companies have disappeared sort of makes it perhaps our biggest economic tragedy, because we've had this major industry that we were able to build that has sort of come and gone without a trace. Because when we look at the late 20th century, where Black insurance companies began to disappear, only Black Enterprise was the only publication that chronicled, what was going on with these companies. And I would argue that, and this is not to, minimize the importance of Black banks, because the community needs a variety of financial institutions, including
Sure.
insurance companies and banks. But we know, for instance, during the Great Depression, most Black banks were casualties and really didn't begin to really reappear until, the late 1950s into the 60s.
Oh, really?
Yeah, most Black insurance companies survived the Great Depression, but they could not survive racial desegregation. And another point about sort of this, the collective nature of insurance companies, most insurance companies were mutual companies, which meant that they weren't owned by stock owners or fat cats.
Okay.
No, they were actually owned by the policy holder. So we talk about sort of communal economics. Black-owned insurance companies, represented sort of the high point of that.
When we talk about, and you've alluded to it, the loss and the numbers, why would somebody, what could a white insurance agency offer me that a Black couldn't offer? Or offer it better, whatever?
Great question. When I was doing my dissertation research on this particular company, Chicago Metropolitan, and I talked to a lot of agents and company officials, and they shared with me that when we got to the 1950s, and when there was this change in, we look at the civil rights movement, the Black freedom movement, it was very clear that the overall status of our people collectively was changing for the better. And from a business standpoint, we saw companies like Metropolitan and Prudential that, whereas they didn't really want our business or discriminated against us, they began to very actively seek our business. And one of the ways that they were able to do this was, in fact, to recruit, some of the top agents from Black companies, offering them more money, to sell Prudential and Metropolitan Life and New York Life policies in the Black community. And and this is, to me, one of the biggest ironies of all this, and I've written and talked about this in several venues, is that we saw companies like Prudential and Metropolitan Life that were able to profit from past discrimination. And specifically, you had Black consumers in the 50s and 60s, where it became a status symbol to buy a policy from Prudential and Metropolitan Life, to be able to say, well, yeah, this is the same policy that they're selling white folk.
Oh, really? Okay.
Yeah. So again, there were a lot of things that, again, contributed to Black companies disappearing. And again, white companies actively recruited Black agents, and Black companies said, well, hey, turnabout's fair play. And this goes back to the one-way nature of racial integration that occurred during this period. Black companies said, well, hey, turnabout's fair play. Let us recruit white agents to, in fact, sell our policies among white consumers. But this turned out to be a failure because, white, consumers, when they had this white agent, in their home, selling a policy, but when they saw that it looked like all the people in this company are Black, they really didn't want anything to do with that, even though, again, you had a white agent, in fact, representing these Black companies. So, Yeah,
Now,
it's a lot of interesting nuances. And the character story even, you got me talking, Brother Brogdon, so
yeah,
I'm,
no,
I'm
that's what I
gonna
want you to
roll
do.
down. In my own writing, I literally, and I don't think this is a stretch, I compare, I draw a parallel between what happened with the Negro baseball leagues and what happened with Black insurance companies, where
Okay.
we saw, Major League Baseball come in and take the top agent, excuse me, the top players
Yep.
from the old Negro leagues, offering more money and
Yep.
better conditions and what have you. And we saw something very similar take place among Black insurance companies, where we saw white companies come in and literally take a lot of the cream of the crop of Black agents during this period and recruited them to sell policies
Let
for,
me ask you this:
industry jobs.
at its heyday, who was the North Carolina Mutual? I suspect was the largest Black insurance agent.
Yes.
At its heyday, what would they be in terms of numbers compared to the white firms, even at that time?
That's a great question, because, and quite frankly, this is an economic reason that contributed to, Black insurance companies disappearing. Even though North Carolina Mutual was the largest Black insurance company, it was very small compared to, MetLife and
Okay,
Prudential
sure,
and what have you.
sure.
And we know that, basic business principle is economy of scale. The larger a business is,
Yeah,
the more economical they can, market their products.
sure, sure.
So this was, one of the attractions for Black consumers. But I would argue too, the flip side of that from an economic standpoint, and this is one of the beauties that I discovered doing this research on the insurance industry, Black or white,
Sure.
is that one of the things about insurance companies compared to other businesses is that because at any given moment in time, there are more people alive paying on their policies than people who are dying and the company has to pay death benefits.
Okay.
Insurance companies run regular surpluses and companies have to figure out, what are we going to do with these surpluses? And historically, Black insurance companies invested significant amounts of their surpluses back into the Black community.
I love it.
And to me, and to carry this story even further,
Okay.
to me, it's not coincidental that as we've seen the disappearance of Black insurance companies, there's been a decline of the infrastructure of Black communities across the country.
Okay.
Because one thing about Metropolitan Life and Prudential and other white companies, they readily take our money, but they're, less inclined to reinvest
I got you.
in Black communities.
Now, when we talk about, let's say, North Carolina Mutual, what at their high point, they had how many agents? Were they national offices across America? How big did they get?
Well, great question. North Carolina Mutual, similar to Atlanta Life, who we talked about earlier, one of the ways that they grew was, in fact, to buy distressed Black companies. Because rather than see a distressed Black company be bought by a white insurer, we saw North Carolina Mutual and Atlanta Life, in fact, buy these distressed Black companies.
Black insurance agencies or other type of companies?
Yeah, other Black companies.
Oh, really?
And in fact, that allowed, North Carolina Mutual to have offices, not just in North Carolina, but, throughout, a big part of the country, the same way with Atlanta Life. And also you had, regional giants, if you will, because Golden State Mutual.
Yeah, I've heard of them.
Which was established in Los Angeles. They had a very nice niche on the West Coast. Chicago Metropolitan, the country that I did my dissertation and research on, they had a niche in the Midwest. So you had, these Black insurance companies that had regional niches, but North Carolina Mutual and Atlanta Life, they had a larger geographic niche
Yeah.
than some of the others.
In Detroit, we had a Wright Mutual.
Right.
I remember
Right.
Wright Mutual,
Right.
and I knew a couple of people that worked there. And they
Right.
had a beautiful office and
Right.
everything. One of the things that I mentioned in my book is about a guy who had an agency who ended up buying enough land to have an island. Are you familiar with that? America Beach and on Amelia Island?
No, I'm not familiar with that.
Yeah, he came out of Florida,
Mhm.
and had a big agency. And so when you chronicle, what's the high point of Black insurance industry? What years is that? Where there's that many of them, that many insurers, so on and so forth.
I would say, and this gets very interesting, and for people that are viewing this, a must read to get information about the history of Black insurance companies is a book called An Economic Detour. It was written in 1941, and it provides a panoramic view of Black-owned insurance companies up to that point. And it's very interesting because in An Economic Detour, the author was, among other things, pessimistic about the fact that even though, and Brother Brogdon, this is, some sad historical truth, that even though, MetLife openly discriminated against Black people in the early 20th century, you had more Black people buying policies from Metropolitan Life than all the Black insurance companies combined during this period. And again, and I talk about this in the context of, how some of us, believe, the white man's ice is colder.
Yeah, right.
But as the 1940s progressed, we saw a real renaissance of Black insurance companies. And literally, we saw Black insurance companies' numbers in terms of growth and assets and profits, in fact, exceeding that of the mainstream insurance industry in terms of
Really,
percentage
I
growth.
love it. Yeah.
And based upon that fact, we saw white insurers saying, well, whoa, let's take another look at what, these Negroes are doing in this industry. And among other things, that helped to motivate white insurers to, hire Black agents and to get more of our business. And by the 1950s, we saw those Black gains pretty much being reversed.
Is there some techniques or marketing techniques that the Black insurance agencies employed? I mean, were they always kind of known? Did they have banners at the Nigger League Baseball advertising their company? Did they do in the media? Were they big media advertisers, so on and so forth?
Yeah, they really did underwrite a lot of activity in the African American community, because again, these were companies that regularly ran surpluses. And one of the ways that they, distributed these surpluses was again to reinvest in communities, and among other things, just supplying loans and other financial assets to African Americans. So yeah, they were in their heyday. And you mentioned Wright Mutual up in Detroit. One of the things about Black insurance companies during this period is that while they were viewed, they were businesses, but they were also viewed as community institutions. And again, you mentioned Wright Mutual had a very beautiful home office. Most Black insurance companies had very beautiful home offices. It was considered to be an honor to work for a Black insurance company. It was, it was a very interesting community-based dynamic. But again, for a variety of reasons, when that began to decline, Black insurance companies become sort of this forgotten chapter
Yeah.
of
But
our history.
did Black insurance agencies have I mean, they had the normal life and whole life, term life and policies, or did they come out with some other unique angle in terms of the products that they offered?
Great question. When we look at the early African American insurance industry, as well as the early mainstream industry, the primary or the most popular form of insurance was called industrial insurance
Oh,
that
really?
featured, because it was, geared toward working people. It featured relatively small policy face values, and it featured, the insurance agent coming by people's homes on a weekly basis to, collect the premiums.
Okay, I remember them stories. Yeah.
Yeah, as time went on, and there were some Black insurers that from the beginning, had whole life policies and what have you. But yeah, you had that sort of industrial insurance was the bedrock. And quite frankly, one of the things that hurt companies, Black insurers, as we move into the 60s and 70s was when the larger insurance industry really moved away from industrial insurance and moved toward more whole life policies and a sort of a marketing structure to make it more convenient for consumers, where you could just mail in your policy payments rather than having to give money to somebody
Yeah.
on a weekly basis. And Black insurers were kind of slow to move in that regard.
Oh,
But Black
yeah,
insurers
right.
too, they sort of prided themselves on the personal touch.
Okay, I love it.
Because again, for instance, Metropolitan Life, they continued to sell insurance to Black people, but when they came in Black people's homes, they weren't always that courteous
Yeah, sure.
to Black people.
Sure.
But when, Black insurance companies would come in your home, they treated people with courtesy.
Yeah, sure.
Oftentimes they were viewed as part of the family,
Yeah,
if you
sure,
will.
sure. Now, when we talk about the Black people and the insurance policies that they would offer, was it mostly just to cover the burial, or did it also, in many instances, give a little extra money? You know how you get these policies and you get a beneficiary, he got $1 million coming to him. Did Black insurance agencies, you follow what my question is,
Yeah,
or what
right,
was
right.
more our interest just, I need enough money if somebody died, we can bury.
Great question. And again, we have to consider that, most of our people at that earlier period were, working class individuals that really didn't have, the sums of money to invest in a policy that would have, $250,000 face value
There you
or
go.
$1
That's
million
what I'm asking. That's right.
face value, but they did have enough that have, $1,000 or $2,000 to ensure that someone would get a good burial and have some extra on the side. So
Yeah.
again, I think they were very cognizant of the consumer market that they were catering to. But then again, you always had some of the larger Black insurance companies that did have products that were aimed at the professional, the Black professional classes that had larger, face values to them.
It appears that the insurance agency was one of them that created the most Black wealth in America, I would think. And this is a question. I mean, like, we had A.G. Gaston. He had an insurance agency.
Right.
And a number of other people, but the biggest of the more successful Black people were in insurance for the most part. Is that something that we could say?
Well, insurance had the most staying power
Okay.
during the early 20th century, because again, when we look at, because in the early 20th century, you had both Black insurance companies and Black banks that began to grow and proliferate. During the Great Depression, most Black banks were wiped out, but most Black insurance companies were able to sustain themselves during, the Great Depression.
So could we say at its heyday, the insurance agency was the largest Black industry?
Yeah, that is very safe.
Yeah, we say that.
To say.
Now
And
the other
again,
one,
when we talk about, and this is something that I've written about and talked about, that when we see the decline and disappearance of Black insurance companies, we're not just talking about corporate entities disappearing. We're talking about jobs disappearing. And in these companies, we held every position from president to janitor.
Yeah.
And when you look at the type of professional jobs that have been lost, that is equally as distressing, just to see a corporate entity, disappear.
Sure. When we talk about the insurance agencies, they also formed an association.
Yeah.
What's it called? And do you know the year that it was formed? And they had conferences across the country, so on and so, one annual conference, that kind of thing.
Oh yeah, yeah. It was started as the National Negro Insurance Association.
Okay.
It began in 1921.
Okay.
In 1954, and in the context of quote unquote integration, the organization dropped Negro from its name and it became, the National Insurance Association. And indeed, it held annual conferences throughout the 20th century. But increasingly, as Black insurance companies disappeared, we saw the influence of the National Insurance Association diminish. And again, that has become, a casualty of history as well. But at its peak, the National Negro Insurance Association / National Insurance Association was a powerful entity and one of the more, well-respected Black business trade associations.
I know it's kind of hard to put it in today's terms, but if you could, I got a guy on the channel who's the insurance man came by the house and the premium was like 7 cents. It was pennies, and I guess this might be the 30s. What would you say it might have cost on a payment policy like that to bury somebody? Is that $100 to bury somebody and that kind of thing? What might it pay off?
Again, it varied from place to place. Because you mentioned A.G. Gaston earlier, he actually started off with a burial association.
Exactly.
And then he figured out, well, yeah, I could, move this into an insurance company. And the company I did my PhD research on, Chicago Met, they started off as a burial system association.
Now, hold on, what does that mean? What does that mean?
Well, you pay for, on an installment plan on a weekly basis, and you are pretty much guaranteed to get a decent burial. Okay. And the fascinating thing about this particular company, and again, just to show you in terms of marketing, was that this company, even though it was based in Chicago, and you talked earlier about, how people got to Chicago, a lot of Chicagoans then as well as now, can trace their roots back to Mississippi. Okay. And one of the, in retrospect, shrewd marketing plans that the company used to, the Metropolitan Funeral System Association, that was the old name of the company before they became Chicago Met. They came up with a marketing campaign that said that with our company, if you or your loved one dies, people have the choice of being buried within a 1,000-mile radius. And this, in fact, would allow people that wanted to be buried in Mississippi to actually be able to do so. But
really, I love it.
Yeah. But again, these burial associations, they were primarily concerned with providing people with, or letting people know that if you pay your weekly stipend, that you will get a decent burial. Industrial insurance was something different because it wasn't solely burial, but a lot of people ended up using those industrial policies
Oh,
or the
I can
proceeds
imagine.
from
Yeah.
those industrial policies for burial.
As we kind of almost come to a close, let's talk about the company, the Chicago Med. Who's the founders? When was it founded? Kind of how big did it get?
The first president of the company was in fact, a funeral director by the name of Daniel Jackson in Chicago.
Is he the founder?
Yeah, he was the actual founder.
Okay.
But Daniel Jackson, besides being a funeral director, he also coordinated policy and gambling operations in Black Chicago. And he ran, a couple gambling hubs in Black Chicago. It turns out that one of his employees at one of his gambling establishments, this guy by the name of Robert Cole, approached Dan Jackson about buying the company. And Dan Jackson agreed to sell the company to Robert Cole. And Robert Cole himself, besides being this insurance company president, he was also a prominent, poker player in Black Chicago in the late 20s and well into the 30s. And an interesting sidebar to this was that, Chicago Met, like a lot of companies early on, even though they survived the Great Depression, they had some financial issues because their constituents were unemployed and what have you. And what Robert Cole did was that he literally, to use the polite term, laundered some of his gambling winnings to, in fact, keep Chicago Met afloat, what then was called the Metropolitan Funeral System Association. But another interesting dynamic was that Robert Cole, in fact, used some of his gambling winnings to resuscitate the Chicago American Giants in the old Negro Leagues. Because they were because we know during the Great Depression, you had a lot of people that were involved in gambling across the country that helped to keep the Negro Leagues afloat. So in Chicago, you had a noted Black gambler who not only owned a Black, was in a burial association, used gambling winnings to keep that afloat, but he also used some of that money to keep the Chicago American Giants afloat. And again, it's kind of funny too that in my research, I interviewed, in fact, the daughter of the manager, because Robert Cole, again, he owned the company, but he had a lot of other things he was doing, and he hired an actual manager to actually run the company. And I interviewed, the daughter of this individual, and we were talking about what her father did, and then at one point she said, "Turn off the tape recorder." And she proceeded to tell me about how Robert Cole had, used gambling winnings to keep the company afloat. And I'm like, and she said, "Well, this is confidential." I know. But for me, as a researcher, I'm like, well, yeah, this is very important. But as it turns out, it proved not to be a dilemma, because when I talked to Robert Cole's son, he was proud of the fact that his dad was this prominent gambler that used his winnings to invest in a lot of community organizations.
Well, it is funny you say that, because as I had come to learn, A.G. Gaston, when he started his agency, he started because he was a loan shark. He would loan money to people and say, "Hey, you got to pay me. I give you $1. You got to give me $1.25."
Right.
And then he took that same type technique and said, "Okay, well, you give me a nickel every week, and I'll make sure that I got the money when somebody that is your beneficiary, you or whatever, that I'll have the money to pay for the burial." That was his start.
Right.
And so where does, and as we on that same vein, where does the loan sharks, or not loan sharks, but the money runners, where do they come in? You know, the what's, it's not money runners. What's
Policy.
it called? Who?
They were the policy.
No, the number man. The number men.
Yeah,
Do they
numbers
play a
runs a
role
policy.
into
That's
this?
what. Yeah, that they used to call. Yeah, back in the day, they called that, policy, because Chicago, in fact, was one of the major centers of that, and literally, policy, especially during the Great Depression, that was actually the largest business that was operating in Black Chicago in terms of revenue, in terms of number of people employed. And literally, we saw the policy kings, as they were known, that reinvested a lot of money
Yeah, right.
back into the community.
Yeah.
For instance, you had a lot of Black professional people. Say if someone wanted to start a dentist's office, they know they couldn't go to a bank and get a loan. They would go to a policy king and say, I want to do this. And more times than not, they would get money to start businesses, like quote unquote legitimate businesses.
Yeah, that's a beautiful trait. So now, do you have a copy of your book, one of your books that you can show us or something like that?
Building the Black Metropolis.
Okay. I got you.
African American Entrepreneurship in Chicago.
I got you.
And this is a co-edited work I did with a colleague that has a variety of chapters that looks at, the growth of Black business in Chicago over time, literally beginning in literally the founder of Chicago, John Point DuSable, was a person of African descent who had a trading post in what came to be known as Chicago. A lot of people don't know that the founder of the city of Chicago was a Black man who was an entrepreneur.
Right.
Another book that I mentioned, the consumer market, Desegregating the Dollar, African American Consumerism in the 20th Century.
Right.
And again, in talking about business, you can't really have a business unless you have a consumer market. And my book is pretty much the first book to really systematically look at our history through the lens of consumerism.
Right.
And my most recent book, and I got some other books there in another part of the house.
You've written a ton of books. Yeah. I told you, everybody.
Now, my latest book is a biography of an individual by the name of Anthony Overton.
I know, I've heard of him.
Yeah, Anthony Overton, in fact, among other things, his claim to fame was being the first business person to win the NAACP Sping Iron Medal in 1927. And that was, again, talking about insurance. He was the president of Victory Life Insurance Company, which was the first Black company to, jump through all the hoops to be able to do business in the state of New York. Also at the time, he was the president of Douglas National Bank, which was the second national bank in the country that was controlled by African Americans. He also owned a personal care products company.
That's right.
Yeah, Overton Hygienic. And it's an interesting Kansas connection with Anthony Overton and his family, in that his father, in fact, was a prominent Black politician in Louisiana during Reconstruction. And when ex-Confederates, retook control, the Overton family literally fled for their lives to Topeka. And Anthony Overton, in fact, Overton Hygienic, before he started the company in 1898 in Kansas City, Missouri. Later, he moved operations to Kansas City, Kansas. And in 1911, when he moved to Chicago, he, in fact, was running his business in Kansas City, Kansas. So, Anthony Overton has a very, interesting, Kansas and Chicago connection.
Yeah, I got one more question. I got to ask you this: What if Black people would have done what differently our attitude, and this is the question, our attitude or something. And maybe even if we would have not fought for civil rights the way we did. And my question is this, some people have said if Dr. King would have said, we're gonna get our own bus system. We ain't gonna ride your bus. And there would have been a change. What do you think that change, what could we have done differently that maybe would have changed the trajectory of Black business in America today?
Well, I tell you, it's very interesting that you mentioned Montgomery and the Montgomery bus boycott, because one of the little known facts associated with that was that as Black people stopped riding the bus to shop downtown, there was a renaissance of Black business activity in Montgomery. We saw, Black businesses being able to upgrade their facilities. Also in Montgomery at the time, there was discussion of starting a Black-owned bank in the cities. So there was a discussion about, what can we do for ourselves more from an economic standpoint.
Right.
But, and you raise, I think, that's one of the real central questions when we look at, mid 20th century, African-American history. Because to be clear, as American citizens, African-Americans should, have the right to full social economic mobility.
Yes.
That every other group has. But one of the unfortunate things from a purely economic standpoint was that it appears that that quest for social economic mobility, we sort of lost our interest in business development, which in retrospect was an unfortunate decision, especially considering we live in a capitalist society that prioritizes, business development.
I got you. Hey, that's the final word, everybody. Oh my God, that's it. I told you gonna like this video. Told y'all. I find these experts and I let them come on, let them do the talking. And I know about them insurance agencies, the Anthony Overton, I got him in the book, the agencies. There are a number of them across America that were huge in its heyday. And that was because, first of all, we were doing our own thing for ourselves. That was the key point of that. And those Masonic orders, true reformers, and the Black lady in Richmond, Virginia, Maggie Lena Walker, coming out of what she did. Everybody, we'll talk about that at a later date. The sister owned the bank and the department store and so on and so forth. We hitting it. Is there a question that I have not asked you? Is there some other point? What's your website? How do people follow you? That kind of thing.
Well, people could, I don't have, my own, distinct website. They can go to, Wichita State University and, just Robert Weems, also I'm blessed to have a few of my own YouTube videos that people can consult to, see, some of what I've talked about in the past, and can go to Amazon to, check out, some of my books. And I just want to tell you, I really appreciate, the invitation, to have a real conversation, about this topic, because this is something that, I can tell you're passionate about, and it's something that I'm passionate about. And, and again, we need more of these conversations on this particular topic, because sadly, the business history of our people, the economic history of Black people remains the most understudied and most under-discussed part of our experience.
Well, not no more. We're gonna give you at least an hour of work today, my friends, and give it to you straight, no chaser. Everybody hit the subscribe button on Strong Inspirations. You see what I'm doing. You see the kind of people, the caliber of the folks that's coming on here. Yeah, hit the like button on this video because I know you like it. I love it. hit the notifications bell when the videos come up, and I'm not putting no time of when I'm doing them because I don't want to be locked in. My heart says, oh, you got a video, let's go. It can be in the morning, at night, whatever, on the weekends. So, hey, that's the way I'm doing it. And then tell somebody about the channel and everybody check it out. You saw the title. I'm going to put the title of his books in the description. Get a copy of that. I'm telling you, I know they well written. They well written, and you're going to like it and learn something new. So get a copy of his book. Follow this brother. Everybody, with that, I'll say this, and I mean this with all sincerity. And I mean this, I want you to stay strong, stay safe, stay on your grind. I love what you're doing and how you influencing them people down there in Wichita, Kansas. And showing them people the beautiful Black history, the businesses, the successes. It by no means is all gloom and doom. And how we work together and pooled our money together. And then we got some money, we invest in other businesses. That's the beauty of the story right there. And that was a beautiful chapter. And it's still going on today. So, hey, everybody, I'll say bye-bye, we out. Have a good day. Peace.
All right.
Thank
Take
you.
care now.